Going into the UFC 300, Bo Nickal will be a minus 1,400 favorite when he steps into the octagon. So far, he's had only 5 MMA fights, from which only 2 were in the UFC, and has never even been to the second round. Yet despite his inexperience, if he loses, it'll be tied for the biggest upset in UFC history. So, why are people so confident about Bo Nickal being victorious at UFC 300 when he's only had 6 minutes of total fight time? The first thing we need to talk about is his wrestling ability, which quite literally runs in Bo's DNA.
At 2 months old, I'm like at the high school state wrestling tournament, you know, so it was kind of just something that was in my blood.
Sure. Obviously, the wrestling is fucking second nature. I was talking to his mom once. He had like 85 wrestling matches before the age of 9.
With the guidance of his grandfather and father, who were both wrestling coaches, Bo became one of the greatest collegiate wrestlers of all time. At Penn State, he won 3 NCAA Division I championships back-to-back, a US wrestling title, and even a world championship at under 23 level. His record throughout college was 120 wins to just 3 losses. And when you stack him up against the likes of Henry Cejudo, Daniel Cormier, or Ben Askren, you could make the case that Bo might be the greatest wrestler the UFC has ever seen.
And he made a statement. He said, "I'm the best wrestler to ever come into MMA." He might be right.
So in late 2019, when Bo announced that he was hanging up his wrestling boots and strapping on a pair of MMA gloves, the combat world had serious expectations. And it wasn't long before Bo Nickal proved the hype was real. After just a few months of training, Bo was already 2-0 as an amateur with 2 quick finishes, and his pro debut went the exact same way. It was clear to the world he was a star in the making, so the major MMA promotions were fighting tooth and nail for his signature. In the end, Bo signed with the UFC.
So after this happened, the next morning, UFC, Bellator, ONE FC, PFL, boom, 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 call it. Let's do it. And I'm like, what the frick? Like, I'm 1-0 pro. Haven't even trained I've been training 8 months or whatever, 9 months.
He had wanted more fights on the regional scene to build experience, but when the UFC calls, you answer. Plus, with his wrestling credentials and ever-growing knockout threat, you can't imagine there were many regional fighters looking to fight Bo. So instead, despite being just 1-0 and having only been training MMA for a single year, it was the Contender series. Nickal went into the octagon as a massive minus 2,400 favorite, odds you rarely see in MMA. When Valentina Shevchenko lost to Alexa Grasso, she was a minus 900 favorite. Even when GSP lost to Matt Serra, arguably the greatest upset in UFC history, George was a minus 1,300 favorite. So for Bo Nickal to be at minus 2,400, there were some serious expectations on his shoulders. And while some fans out there felt people were getting carried away, Bo proved the betting odds were fair. It took him just 1 minute to get his hand raised. And after another Contender Series fight the following month as a huge favorite, and yet another 1-minute finish, the Bo Nickal hype reached a new height. But Bo wasn't just relying on his wrestling, he was knocking people out on the feet. Bo Nickal hadn't even fought in the UFC, yet fans and even Bo himself were already claiming he could beat the then recent middleweight champions in Israel, Adesanya and Alex Pereira.
Do you feel right now you go into the UFC and you could beat the guys in the top 10?
Yeah, I feel that for sure.
Well, he's going to be the greatest middleweight of all time. He's going to beat everybody, and he's ready to fight guys in the top 10 right now. And they say that's my wrestling bias, but I believe it.
I think it's just pending whenever this guy actually becomes champion at 185 pounds. I think if you're able to put him against Israel Adesanya now, just according to styles, Bo Nickal beats him. Bo Nickal beats him. He puts him to his back, controls his wrist, grapples the heck out of him, and that's all she wrote.
So Dana White had no choice. He wasn't going to let Bo Nickal go to a rival promotion, and he couldn't just let him keep beating up prospects on the Contender Series. It was time to up the competition levels and throw Bo Nickal into the UFC despite having just 3 professional fights under his belt, and throw him into the deep end they did. It was the pay-per-view opener of UFC 285, and not the usual fight night prelims where you expect to see a newcomer make their debut. The pressure was on, But no one was putting more expectations on the fight than Bo himself.
You know, make sure that every single thing that I'm doing is like completely on point.
How does the fight end on Saturday night?
First round finish for sure.
And while his opponent, Jamie Pickett, wasn't a top-ranked middleweight by any means, he already had 6 UFC fights to his name and over 20 in total. The gulf in MMA experience was huge. But that didn't stop Bo Nickal coming in as a minus 1,600 favorite. And if he lost, it would be the biggest upset in UFC history, seemingly a trend in his short career. But Bo made easy work of his opponent, and it was throughout UFC 285 and all the extra media obligations where fans really got an understanding of the mentality that created the wrestling star.
You know, people will act like I'm talking crazy because I say like, I'm ready to go, Chimaev, let's get it. But reality is, you know, this dude won 3 national titles in Sweden and then came into MMA and has 10 fights. Bro, I've been competing since I was 5. Like, I had 120 plus NCAA wrestling matches. I won a U23 world championship. Like, I'm coming with 10 times the experience that you have. So, you know, when people say like, oh, you're not ready, stay in your lane, like, y'all don't know what the hell you're talking about. So you'll see what happens when we get in the cage.
We know all fighters are confident, but saying Khamzat Chimaev isn't on your level before you've even made your UFC debut is something you don't see every day. And at first glance, Bo may come across as overly confident, maybe even cocky to some, but he's incredibly self-critical and has a thirst to improve that you don't see too often.
I remember being like 7 or 8, going to wrestling tournaments, and my parents, we had like this van with like a TV in it, right? And my sisters would want to watch, you know, Lion King or some Disney movie, and I would make them, we had this DVD set of the best Olympic trials matches for wrestling, and I'd be like, no, that's what we're putting in. I'll go into ChatGPT, and you have to ask it the right questions, but I'll say, hey, formulate a game plan for this type of fighter. I'm a wrestler at middleweight, this, that, blah, 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 and I'm gonna fight this guy. Give me the perfect game plan for him.
That's why you see him taking a BJJ fight against Gordon Ryan. He's not afraid to lose in the pursuit of learning. And that unique mentality that helped Bo become so elite at wrestling looks like it's having the same effect in MMA already. Which explains why in his next bout at UFC 290, Nickal was the biggest betting favorite in UFC history. Again, Bo was opening up the pay-per-view main card, this time against an undefeated UFC newcomer in Val Woodburn.
Do you find it challenging at all? Because it seems like unless you go out there and destroy this guy in 30 seconds, people are going to say, oh, that Bo guy is all hype. You know, we told you he wasn't that guy. I mean, is it difficult? It seems like the expectations for you are almost unrealistic at this point.
It was pretty crazy after my last fight because people were saying, oh, he had trouble taking Jamie Pickett down. He stuffed his takedown. And I was like, I took him down in 20 seconds. Like, what are we talking about here? Let's be real. I think that there's just going to be that expectation that's set, right? I'm 4-0 with 4 first-round finishes, and that's what you know, people want to see me fail. A lot of people want to see me win, and there's just a lot of expectations. For me, I'm going out there to perform to the best of my ability, whether that's a first-round finish, whether that's, you know, a decision. That it's not really of concern, the result. I just am going out there to do my best, and everything else will take care of itself.
And that's exactly what happened. Bo destroyed his opponent in 30 seconds.
He's at that level. He can compete with these guys at the highest level. He's got hands. He can wrestle like a motherfucker. He lives a championship lifestyle at an early age, 25, whatever he is.
However, not everyone was sold on the Bo Nickal hype train though. Some fans were claiming Bo was getting handpicked fights by the UFC and has been getting pushed onto pay-per-view main cards when he doesn't deserve it. But the UFC is in a tough spot with Bo Nickal. They've got someone incredibly inexperienced, yet extremely popular, and most importantly, elite at one aspect of mixed martial arts. He's making fights look like a walk in the park, so they have to up the level of competition, but equally, if they throw him into the top 15 and he loses, fans will be quick to say he was rushed. We've seen fighters with top-tier wrestling come to the UFC and get handed rude awakenings by the top guys. Take Ben Askren and Gregor Gillespie, even Henry Cejudo's first fight against Demetrius Johnson, for example. So putting the limelight on him and slowly increasing the caliber of his opponent is probably wise. And there's no bigger limelight than UFC 300. UFC 300 is going to be one of the biggest cards ever, and Bo Nickal has his normal spot as the pay-per-view opener. However, this decision really caused a stir this time.
I like that it makes people mad. I think that's so funny.
Yeah.
You don't deserve it. I'm like, okay.
Thank you.
He's been placed above 6 former UFC champions on the card and enters the octagon as a -1400 favorite. For reference, the UFC 200 main card opener was the former heavyweight champion Cain Velasquez against Travis Brown. Now, it's not worth debating whether he deserves the spot or not, as the UFC are looking to build a star, and giving him this exposure makes sense from their point of view. But just remember that Bo Nickal has had less than 6 minutes of total fight time as a professional, and yet he's on the UFC 300 main card. At this rate, he could legitimately be in title contention by next year. After all, Alex Pereira came to the UFC as a master striker and won the belt in 12 months. So why can't Bo Nickal? Whether you love him or hate him, clearly Bo is doing something right. But if you want to see the UFC's biggest star doing it all wrong, check out my previous video about the dark change of Conor McGregor.